What is up, weather enthusiasts? I'm your Met, Pat's Path Predictor. Let's get right into the weather. Alright, so here's the situation we have for you, ladies and gentlemen. We have a lot of big news to talk to you about today. Number one, we have Tropical Storm Barry in the Bay of Campeche, expected to make landfall near the Veracruz region in the next 12 hours. It is currently strengthening as it's approaching land, so we're going to keep an eye on that. We also have a new area of interest tagged along the Florida coast and east coast of the United States to pay attention to as well. So let's go ahead and dive right into it right here. And as you can see, we have Tropical Storm Barry, and we have this area of interest. Let's go ahead and start with Tropical Storm Barry first, and we'll go ahead and go to the public advisory and get all the information first, and then we'll move on to the new area of interest. So here's the situation. Its current location is about 50 miles southeast of Tuxpan, Mexico. It is moving at this current point at 12 miles per hour to the northwest. Maximum sustained winds are 45 miles per hour. And minimum central pressure is 1,006 millibars. Tropical storm force winds extend outward 35 miles from the center. And as we can show you from the cone right here, we can take a quick gander at that right here. Taking a quick gander, it's in a relatively isolated area on the northeastern quadrant. Still going to want to pay attention to it. Tropical storm warnings are in effect for parts of the coast of Mexico right here, from the for the Gulf Coast, from Baca de Catan to southward to Tecoluta. So that's your advisory right there. Taking a quick look at the discussion as of 10 a.m., this is when they designated this Tropical Storm Barry. Convective activity with this system has increased somewhat this morning, though it's not terribly organized, thanks to, in large part, due to continued 25 to 30 knots of wind shear over the system. Air Force Reserve reconnaissance is currently sampling over the system, has found a better defined circulation this morning, with fixes also indicating that the system is gaining more latitude. Within the past 20 minutes, a northeast inbound leg of the storm found 850 millibar flight level winds of 43 knots and a drop zone of surface of 39 knots. This recent information is the primary basis of increasing the winds to 35 knots or 40 miles per hour initially. But they did, in the recon, did find stronger winds in this, so let's go ahead and show you that. And before they left, they found flight level winds peaking at around 52 knots, and they in their data that they did acquire with this, I believe this is drop 16, they found a 41 knot reading at the surface right here, which is why they increased it to 45 miles per hour. So the system is intensifying at landfall. However, the main question is this going to intensify a bit further? And I do personally think that 50 miles per hour is plausible at this current point. However, I think after that, it's going to completely cap out at 50, and then after that, it's going to make landfall and weaken going forward. But considering over the last pass, it went from about based on what I'm seeing right here, went from basically the max wind band being around 42 or 43 knots over here at flight level, which translated down to about 39 knots, and then increasing to 41 knots. I do think 50 miles per hour is plausible at the next advisory if this trend continues, but that is a very big if, and we're going to have to wait for more data and information going forward. Going back to the discussion right here, an upper-level trough located over southern Texas appears partially responsible for the unfavorable upper-level winds currently over the tropical storm. This is unlikely to change. Right here. Despite the shear, waters over the Gulf remain warm, 28 to 29 degrees Celsius, and there is plenty of deep layer moisture. The upper-level flow pattern forecast shows a little more intensification before landfall tonight over the eastern Mexico. There is more or less a lot in line with the regional hurricane model runs. The system should weaken quickly as it moves inland overnight. They peaked this at 45 miles per hour, but that was expected to be 12 hours out instead of 3 hours out, so I do think 50 miles per hour is kind of plausible and with this system right here, but that's kind of the latest we have on Tropical Storm Barry going forward. Tropical storm watches are in effect. This is going to be making landfall later tonight, and we'll keep you updated on that. But we're also going to be watching this area of interest right here that has been tagged this morning across parts of Florida, across parts of the Gulf Coast, and across parts of the East Coast as well. So let's go ahead and take a quick look and a quick gander at the reading. Towards the end of the week, towards next weekend, an area of low pressure could develop from a remnant frontal boundary near or along the southeastern U.S. Atlantic or Gulf coasts. Some gradual tropical or subtropical development could occur there afterwards as it drifts slowly off the U.S. coastline. 20% chance of formation in the next 7 days. But we were actually talking about this on stream a little bit last night. And we were talking about it in yesterday's video, and I wanted to stress this out that this area was tagged, and we were looking at the models, and they were increasing they were increasing the odds of development with this, and then the NHC went ahead and tagged this as an area of interest. So we're gonna have to pay attention this week to see how this will pan out. It looks to me that it's gonna the threat does start around the 3rd or 4th of July, and then it moves through Florida and then off the East Coast right there. I know the GFS had some runs of this system entering the Gulf region and all of that, and we'll get to that in a second, but ultimately, that's kind of what we're paying attention to. This is more of our quote-unquote long-term threat over here that we're paying attention to along the Florida and eastern coast. So our viewers from Florida and our viewers from Georgia and the Carolinas, Greg, shout out to you from Savannah, which I believe is Chatham County down there. You're going to want to pay attention to this, mainly not more so for the tropical like wind threat or anything like that, but more so for the flood threat for that part of Georgia. So I do want to kind of stress that. I do want to kind of give that shout out and let him know, hey, you might want to pay attention to this, mainly due to flooding reasons since you're in emergency management. And now let's go ahead and take a quick look at satellite imagery. Let's go ahead and go to Tropical Storm Barry, and we'll use the Gulf, the Gulf wide satellite just to kind of analyze what's going on. So essentially, taking a look at Barry first, relatively disorganized right here, but you are seeing this consistent convection firing off. And while the wind shear has been kind of chipping away at the structure of it, a lot of the convection I am noticing is not really blowing up to the point where it's starting to touch the wind shear per se. And what I mean by that is essentially all the convection is below that area of 25 to 30 knots of wind shear, and that's how the system's been able to sustain itself, and that's how the system's been able to strengthen, And what essentially this is doing is it's kind of, for lack of better terms, going quote-unquote off the radar right here. And another interesting thing I am looking at is, at least looking at right here, you are noticing a lot of convection really firing off on much of the Gulf Coast as well. Right here. Maybe some of it's attributed to Barry as well. I think some of it's also attributed to the outflow in the lake breeze, or the sea breeze, as well as the kind of the cooler air starts to match the warmer air, causes the warmer air to rise and forms clouds and convection and all of that. So you're noticing this phenomena across the entire Gulf Coast right here, from pretty much all the way down here in Mexico, all the way to Florida, which is pretty interesting. I think Barry does have something to do with it, but also it's because of the the sea breeze, and all of that as well. So you're going to want to pay attention to that too. So it looks like Texas might be at least indirectly impacted by Barry due to potential flash flooding and all of that stuff. If you're from Corpus Christi down all the way up to Houston, you're going to want to pay attention to that as well. And then if you're going ahead and taking a look at more of the Gulf threat for this week, what's going to happen is there's going to be a front that moves through and kind of stalls out in the northeastern Gulf region right here. And that low pressure system is going to detach from that and become more tropical in nature, and then allow for convection to fire up, more thunderstorms, and then potential development either right as it's approaching Florida or on the East Coast as well. So that's another factor to watch as well. Now let's go ahead and take a quick look at the model runs for you guys. Let's go ahead and go to forecast models, and we'll go ahead and go to our hurricane runs for Barry right here. Here's the 12Z run for Barry. This is a little bit outdated, I will say this right here, but ultimately you do have this system expecting to make landfall around actually this evening, around I'd say 8 o'clock this evening Central Time. Right here across parts of Mexico, so you're going to want to pay attention to that, but the system is going to dissipate pretty quickly. We might talk about it again tomorrow as kind of a remnant low, but then it's going to weaken and dissipate moving forward. Looking at the HMON run right here, HMON is similar situation, does actually have the system impacting the Veracruz region and then making landfall between 8, 9, or 10 o'clock, 8 and 10 o'clock this evening, Central Time. And then it just moves and then dissipates, and that's the last we will hear of that. And then taking a quick look at the Halves A run, I'm going to see which one kind of has its act together. Okay, the Halves A is really not showing the system get its act together right here. We'll have to see how that's going to pan out. Looking at the Halves B run, hopefully this is not a similar issue. Unfortunately, it is. So the HMON, the H-Wharf are kind of our runs that we're using for hurricane runs. But again, the system itself is outperforming the hurricane models, and while we still do look at this for the sake of consistency and all of that stuff, they're not nearly as important as looking at real-time conditions. They never, quite frankly, are. And whenever I see hurricane runs of explosive development and all that stuff like I saw last year, I would say, okay, this seems a little outlandish, but let's see what the conditions are saying with this and how the conditions are factoring in. And more times than not, I did notice this, is the kind of the system would ultimately go to what these outlandish, or at least seem to be outlandish runs. Beryl was a good example of that. Helene was a good example of that. Francine was an example. Milton was absolutely a big example of that. So that's something important to note. But in the instance of Barry, you're going to have to look at real-time conditions with this. So that's what we have going on with Tropical Storm Barry. Next thing we're going to go ahead and take a look at over here is this potential system that's going to be moving through Florida in the next a few days or so. Let's go ahead and take a quick gander at it. Let's start with the European run. We'll go ahead and use the 0Z, so that goes the furthest out, and taking a quick look at some of the initial stuff and then the conditions and all of that. So you're not seeing much until the 1st of July when those storms start to develop and turn up. And then around the 3rd of July, at least according to some of these forecasts, you're starting to notice a lot more convection and a lot more storms starting to fire off across much of Florida. And it looks like the low pressure system is starting to organize around that time as well. And then you start to notice it's moving off into the East Coast around the 4th and the 5th of July. And as you can see, you start seeing that low pressure system trying to close itself off. But the European does also have the system hugging the coast and heading towards Georgia and the Carolinas around the 5th or 6th of July. Right here. So those are factors that you're going to want to pay attention to. And Greg, like I said, watch out mainly for flooding since you're in emergency management in Savannah. So that's what we have with the European right here. Next thing we're taking a quick look at is the GFS. GFS has been pretty interesting. The 18Z yesterday had a hurricane just going the opposite direction and making landfall in Louisiana, similar to Barry of 2019. Well, we're not Barry of 2025, obviously, but the GFS has the system trying to organize before it moves into Florida and developing from there. But ultimately, the GFS is having a hard time initializing it and having a hard time grasping it. The GFS doesn't even want this system in the Atlantic, which I do think is a little iffy and a bit outlandish because other runs are indicating that that is going to be happening, and the steering currents do support this system moving into the East Coast. Now let's go ahead and show you the Canadian run. Canadian around the 1st of July, you're noticing more convection. The front starts to the low starts to attach from the front around the 3rd or 4th of July. Then you start to see potentially some stuff going on. But the CMC, interestingly, doesn't really have that much happening with this, even though the NHC has tagged it. It looks like it's trying to get a decent grasp of it. Okay, yeah, it's around the 4th of July, it's starting to potentially close off and organize from there off the East Coast. But by and large, what you're noticing is like the CMC just has this system really moving off, kind of hovering around the Gulf Stream over those very warm waters over there. So those are some factors that you're going to want to pay attention to. Last run we'll take a quick look at is the Icon run, and then we'll look at some conditions for you very quickly. And the Icon run has the system trying to organize and develop starting around the 3rd and 4th of July across parts of Florida right here. The Icon does want the system to move more west, I'd say, and head towards the Florida Panhandle as a tropical storm, which I don't entirely buy, to be honest. The Icon run is a bit iffy with this, and so is the GFS. But if we do see more data indicating that this might be a bigger possibility, I'll be more inclined to believe it. But as of right now, steering currents are going to be are going to support this going to the East Coast, and that's that's where I'm looking at right now. Now to look at some of the conditions, both with Barry as well as this area of interest and more long-term threat as well. Let's go ahead and go to the European, go to the 0Z, and we'll go ahead and start with the wind shear. So taking a quick look at the wind shear, parameters right here. Barry's going to get sheared until landfall. We're not going to worry about that. But then starting around the 1st of July, you do see a pocket of low wind shear across parts of the Gulf region where this system is expected to start potentially organizing and developing. And that low wind shear pocket does persist through the 3rd and the 4th of July right here, because there's a trough, though. I am noticing kind of digging down towards Florida, but the latest European run mainly has that trough system staying out of Florida, with the exception of areas like Gainesville, Jacksonville, and areas north of that for right now. And then you have the low pressure system potentially organizing and developing south of that wind shear, and just the outflow getting caught into it and allowing for it to breathe a bit more. So it's going to be in a relatively lower sheared environment than I think a lot of us were expecting at this current point. I think this is also why the NHC has this tagged, because it looks to me that the wind shear environment is going to be a bit better than expected for tropical development. In terms of the moisture, I want to take a quick look at this as well, at least for the short term. Looking at relative humidity, looks like it's going to be in a big moisture pocket right here. There's not going to be as much dry air until it gets towards the Atlantic, which could potentially inhibit some development. But by and large, you do have ample moisture, at least in the short term, to allow for tropical development to occur. And the precipitable water anomalies, it's definitely a much more moist environment than average in that region right there to pay attention to. So what I'm looking at right here is overall some relatively mixed signals, but because also that you have to take into consideration the warm waters over here, they are very, very warm as well, and that's going to be more than enough fuel for development to start taking place. The wind shear is going to not be as high as well, and while there may be a little bit of dry air potentially, it looks to me that if there's a lot of convection with this system, as some of the models are forecasting this to be, this will have no trouble potentially developing, whether it's on the coast of off the coast of Florida or off the East Coast, and it has the warm water to do it. And it has the wind shear patterns to get started as well. You have a lot of ingredients to look at for our Florida people for tropical development. Am I saying it's going to happen? It's a little iffy right now. My question is not so is this going to develop, but my question is where's the front going to detach, and how does it initialize from there? Because that's the main question right here. This is a similar setup to Barry of 2019, like I mentioned earlier, and that's a factor that you're going to want to pay attention to. But ultimately, you have some good conditions, and you have plenty of, you have plenty of kind of a room for error for this system to develop, and this would be the new Chantal if it does get named, because we had Andrea, we had Barry, now we have Chantal on the list right there. So that's what we're looking at in terms of the short term. Very quickly, in the last minute or so, I do want to take a quick look at the long-term threat in terms of relative humidity, wind shear, and all of that, because I am still paying attention to potentially some stuff happening in the main development region. The European's been kind of interesting a little bit, showing a couple of low pressure systems potentially trying to get their act together just north of the intertropical convergence zone. Now, what we're starting to notice here is, yes, there is some Sahara dust right here, but at least in the southern part of it and just north of the ITCZ in the main development region, you are noticing more moisture starting to get over there. And taking a look at the precipitable water anomalies, you're looking at a significantly more moist environment than what you would normally see at this time of year. Normally, you'd see a lot of Sahara dust completely choke off development for a little while, and that's kind of what we've grown accustomed to. But what I'm noticing with this is a more moist environment, in part due to the Sahel region warming up and kind of bringing in more monsoons, but also in part because you have a situation where the MJO is going to be more favorable in that part of the Atlantic. And that is the main reason I am paying attention to it. And that is some factors that we will look at more tomorrow here on the Pat's Path Predictor channel. But with that being said, we're going to go ahead and close the video out right here. I really hope you enjoyed it. Be sure you leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. The goal, as always, is to get more people engaged with weather. If you want to help out, hang out, or ask us some questions, be sure to join the Storms Unite Discord server. The link to that is in the end screen. And with that being said, have a wonderful day, guys. Stay safe.